watching Keepin' It Green. I'm your host, Debbie Klugers, and today I have with me Mr. Mike Bottini.
Hi,
Welcome,
Debbie.
Mike.
Thank you.
A naturalist, an author, wildlife biologist. You do all kinds of good stuff. Trailblazer.
Right. Yeah, anything that can get me outside. That's the key thing, out of the office.
There you go. And you're not writing, you're out
researching.
researching.
Right.
That's
right.
great. And you know that we like to start off with an environmental tip, and I think you brought along a great one.
Yeah, it's with the warming weather. There's a lot more wildlife that is stirring. Things are coming out of their winter hibernation, and in a few weeks we'll start having turtles moving around. Mm-hmm. And our common box turtle is an animal that is well adapted to living even in the residential areas of the east end of Long Island. It doesn't need a lot of habitat. Can live in small areas in your backyard. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that is going to be a huge problem for them in terms of surviving in the long term is collisions with automobiles.
Sure.
So
they're
my
hard
tip,
to see.
Right, they're hard to see, but they're the size of a grapefruit, and unless you're tailgating, you should be able to see them. They're not like a squirrel. Mm-hmm. They don't dart out in front of you.
Very slow.
And so my tip would be to take it slow on the roads and keep an eye out for wildlife. And if you do see turtles on the road, taking care not to get rear-ended yourself, pull off the side of the road and try and move it to the side of the road that it's headed. Right. Can make a big difference.
I do that often. We kind of have a little thing going on at my house. I saved a turtle today, and everyone gets all excited.
Right.
And if someone did see an injured animal, it would be a good idea to call the Wildlife Rescue Center of the Hamptons.
That's right. Yeah, they do.
Or another local group.
Yeah,
they're 728 Wild.
Right.
Easy to remember. So, Mike, today's show topic is the river otter.
Right.
Interesting critter.
Yeah, when I moved here from graduate school in 1988 to work at the group for the South Fork, I was surprised to hear there were some sightings of river otters on Long Island, and all the literature I looked at said they had been most likely exterminated from the Long Island area during the fur trade into the 1700s.
Wow. Long time ago.
Yes, a long time ago. And actually, I was surprised to learn that they were, the fur trade exterminated them from all of New York State except a very small area of the Adirondacks.
Wow.
So I was intrigued with the sightings, and the river otter is a very elusive creature. When you do see it, it's usually in the water. Mm-hmm. It's tough to get a real idea of the body size, so it's easy actually to mistake them for some other aquatic mammals.
Right, they look kind of like
common.
A beaver or kind of like
a
a muskrat.
Yeah, usually, you might just see the head. But I kept track of that information, and I looked at the last survey of Long Island for mammals was done in the 60s by Paul Connor. And he published a paper on that, and he found no sign of river otters on Long Island at that time. That was published in the early 70s.
What is a sign of a river otter that you guys are looking for?
If there are, river otters are very habitual once they've occupied a territory. Mm-hmm. They have large territories, so that makes them difficult to actually see. They're always on the move. But where they do come out of the water, say to cross a dam or to get from one body of water to another body of water, where they exit a pond and maybe get into the salt marsh area, the estuary, they have designated places called, some people call them pullouts, most biologists call them latrine sites for the obvious reason that they mark them with their scat.
Okay.
And that's a way they communicate with other otters that might be passing through.
Is that picture that you have of the
Yeah,
the fish
I'm holding
scales?
fish scales in my hand.
Okay, maybe we can show that. So that's river otter scat.
That's river otter scat. So these are fish eaters. They also like to eat any kind of easy to catch fish. They love to eat. And around here they would go for eels. It's a favorite food for them. And crabs is also another thing they really like. So that's stuff that when they deposit that at the latrine sites, particularly the fish material, it doesn't degrade very easily.
Right.
So unless it's on a slope and gets washed away, it can be around for a long time. And it's a good way to pin down whether or not an otter is in an area. A lot of scientists would use tracking as a way to go out and document them. And we don't have enough reliable snow cover to do that. So the survey I did to actually find out their distribution and presence on Long Island was a scat survey.
How long did it take you to complete that survey? 'Cause it seems like a pretty large
It's a
area.
huge area, yeah. What I did was I used, this is something that the general public was very helpful with, and they can actually help the project as it moves forward.
Okay.
In terms of, I let people know that I was doing this, and I had a lot of media coverage of the survey. And what I did is I mapped potential sightings. Now, it could have been muskrat, but in fact, what I found out was that the majority of calls and emails I got were validated by field surveys.
Okay.
And knowing the habits of the river otter, once I have a general location where they saw it in a certain body of water, I could look at an aerial photograph and figure out if there were otters in that area, where they most likely would have their latrine sites, and certain characteristics you can look for. What
kind of dens do they have? Do they have any kind of special?
They actually will often, they're very rugged animals. They'll often rest right out in the open on a bed of Phragmites or under a pine tree on the pine needles. They generally only go into dens in the wintertime. They might use, and their favorite denning sites for resting and also for having their young are unfortunately abandoned beaver lodges. And we only have one resident beaver on Long Island at this time. So
that's so interesting, one lone beaver.
Right.
Can we get him a friend on one of those dating sites or
yeah,
something?
Right. Well, all of these, Long Island, there were a lot of wildlife species that were wiped out of Long Island many years ago, before we had any conservation laws. And a lot of those species were also wiped out of large areas of New York and New England. But with the advent of conservation laws, they were able to recolonize a lot of those areas.
That's great.
Long Island is a little unusual in that it's an island, and the closest point to the mainland is very urbanized. So a lot of species that are now common in Connecticut, Westchester, and New Jersey haven't gotten a foothold on Long Island.
How do you think these first few river otters came back to Long Island after all that time?
Well, interesting, the beaver and the river otter are both very good swimmers. They would have no problem making the crossing from Connecticut to Long Island across the Sound, which is an 8 to 10 mile passage, depending on where you do that. But they have a predisposition not to venture out into
open
water like that. So what they seem to have been doing, the river otters seem to be, the juveniles, when they are done with their parental care, which is at about aged 10 to 12 months, they disperse and look for unoccupied habitat by moving along the shoreline of different waterways. So they would move along the Connecticut and Westchester shorelines, and I believe they're making the crossing to Long Island from Pelham Bay Park over to Sands Point and Kings Point.
Wow.
And the first habitat that I found that's been occupied by river otters, well-established habitats on Long Island, is on the north shore of Nassau County, in the Mill Neck Oyster Bay area. And from there, it seems that they